How is it possible that wood used 1,000 years ago can still remain solid today? This video aims to answer that question clearly by explaining why medieval wood resisted decay, how the techniques used by craftsmen of the time are confirmed by modern science, and what this meant for the durability of their structures. The tree species they chose, the timing of the harvest, and the natural treatments applied: soaking in water, preserving with salt, slow smoking, and coating with oils and resins, all had real biological effects that prevented fungi, bacteria, and insects from breaking the wood down, a fact modern research fully supports. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these old methods were so effective, why most of them disappeared in the industrial age, and how the evidence found in archaeological remains still proves the value of medieval craftsmanship. Medieval wood selection and cutting techniques. Understanding why medieval wood survived for centuries begins with how it was selected and cut. Medieval craftsmen didn't choose trees randomly. They relied on practical knowledge built through generations of observation. They preferred species known for natural resistance to decay, primarily oak, chestnut, elm, and larch. These woods contain higher levels of tannins, natural chemicals that slow down fungal growth and repel insects. Even without understanding the chemistry behind it, medieval builders recognized that structures made from these species lasted noticeably longer. Just as important as the type of wood was the timing of the cut. Most trees were felled during the coldest months of winter, when sap movement inside the trunk was at its lowest. With less internal moisture, the wood dried more evenly, attracted fewer insects, and became far less likely to rot early. Many craftsmen also followed traditional timing rules, such as cutting only during the waning moon, not because of superstition, but because generations of builders had observed that wood harvested during certain periods remained stronger and more stable. After cutting, the logs were never rushed into use. Medieval workers knew that wood needed time to dry slowly and naturally, often for months or even years, depending on the final purpose. This slow seasoning process reduced splitting, minimized internal stress, and prepared the timber for long-term durability. By the time the wood entered a building, ship, or tool, it had already gone through a careful, deliberate preparation that modern mass production rarely replicates. 2. Natural preservation methods used in the Middle Ages. Medieval wood didn't survive for centuries by chance. It survived because craftsmen used a series of natural preservation methods that directly targeted the causes of rot. The most common technique was long-term water soaking. Freshly cut logs were submerged in rivers, lakes, or specially dug pits for weeks or even months. This process slowly flushed out sugars and starches inside the wood, exactly the substances fungi and insects feed on. By removing these nutrients before the wood was ever used, medieval workers unintentionally created a material far less appealing to decay organisms. Modern wood science confirms that water logging significantly reduces rot risk, which explains why many medieval timbers recovered from wet environments remain remarkably intact today. Salt preservation was another widely used technique. Especially in coastal regions, timber intended for piers, docks, ships, and defensive structures was often soaked in seawater or packed in salt piles. Salt acted as a natural antimicrobial agent, inhibiting bacterial activity and preventing fungal spores from colonizing the fibers. It also drew moisture out slowly, aiding the drying process without shocking or cracking the wood. Even without knowing the chemistry, medieval builders noticed that wood treated with salt weathered harsher conditions and resisted deterioration longer than untreated timber. Smoking was also an essential preservation process. Instead of exposing wood to direct fire, craftsmen hung or stacked it near slow-burning heat sources like hearths, kilns, or charcoal pits for extended periods. The smoke carried phenols and natural resins that penetrated the surface, forming a protective layer. This coating repelled insects, reduced moisture absorption, and hardened the outer fibers of the wood. Evidence from old barns, smokehouses, and even medieval weapons suggests that smoked wood held its structural integrity far longer than air-dried timber. Modern studies show that smoked wood absorbs up to 50% less water, which directly contributes to decay resistance. Oils and resins formed another major part of medieval preservation. Craftsmen frequently applied coats of linseed oil, pine resin, beeswax, or tar to create a water-resistant barrier. These natural substances infiltrated the pores of the wood, sealing microgaps and slowing down the entry of moisture, the main trigger for rot. Ships, doors, and exterior beams were routinely treated with multiple layers, each heated to help deeper absorption. Over time, these coatings hardened, giving the wood a durable shell that required little maintenance. Many medieval structures still show traces of these organic finishes, demonstrating how effective they were in real environmental conditions. Mineral-rich environments were another unexpected but effective preservation factor. Some medieval builders deliberately buried timber in clay or soil with high mineral content before using it. Clay stabilized moisture levels, prevented oxygen exposure, and insulated the wood from surface fungi. In other cases, construction techniques themselves caused preservation, such as driving wooden piles deep into oxygen-poor riverbeds or lake bottoms. Without oxygen, decay organisms simply couldn't function, allowing the submerged wood to survive for hundreds of years. Archaeological discoveries of perfectly preserved bridge foundations and harbor installations confirm how successful this method was. Finally, combining these methods often resulted in extremely durable wood. A beam might be winter harvested, soaked for weeks, seasoned slowly, smoked, and finished with oil or resin before installation. No single technique made medieval wood indestructible, but together they created material that was naturally resistant, chemically stable, and ideally prepared for long-term exposure. When we look at surviving medieval structures today, from shipwrecks to city gates, their condition is a direct reflection of this careful, layered preservation approach. Modern industry tends to value speed over longevity, which is why many of these ancient processes disappeared, even though their effectiveness is clearly proven by the archaeological record. 3. Forgotten techniques and what modern science reveals. Many medieval wood preservation techniques didn't disappear because they failed. They vanished because industrialization demanded speed, mass production, and low cost. Yet the old processes that survived through oral tradition were often surprisingly precise. For example, craftsmen intentionally controlled the drying environment. They avoided direct sunlight, fast drying, and sudden temperature changes because they knew wood could split or warp. Slow seasoning in shaded, ventilated sheds allowed moisture to escape gradually while preserving the wood's internal structure. Today, we know sudden drying causes internal stress, micro cracks, and pathways for fungal invasion, exactly what medieval workers accidentally prevented through patient, time-consuming methods. Carpenters also selected specific parts of the tree for different purposes. Hardwood, naturally richer in resins and tannins, was chosen for beams, posts, and weapons because it resisted decay better than sapwood. Sapwood, with higher nutrient content, was avoided for structural elements but used for flexible components where resilience mattered. This understanding wasn't scientific in the modern sense. It came from centuries of observation. Builders saw which beams failed early and which lasted, gradually developing rules that mirrored modern wood anatomy research. Today, we recognize hardwood as naturally rot-resistant, confirming that medieval selection practices were grounded in real biological effects. 3. Forgotten techniques and what modern science reveals. Many medieval wood preservation techniques didn't disappear because they failed. They vanished because industrialization demanded speed, mass production, and low cost. Yet the old processes that survived through oral tradition were often surprisingly precise. For example, craftsmen intentionally controlled the drying environment. They avoided direct sunlight, fast drying, and sudden temperature changes because they knew wood could split or warp. Slow seasoning in shaded, ventilated sheds allowed moisture to escape gradually while preserving the wood's internal structure. Today, we know sudden drying causes internal stress, micro cracks, and pathways for fungal invasion, exactly what medieval workers accidentally prevented through patient, time-consuming methods. Carpenters also selected specific parts of the tree for different purposes. Hardwood, naturally richer in resins and tannins, was chosen for beams, posts, and weapons because it resisted decay better than sapwood. Sapwood, with higher nutrient content, was avoided for structural elements but used for flexible components where resilience mattered. This understanding wasn't scientific in the modern sense. It came from centuries of observation. Builders saw which beams failed early and which lasted, gradually developing rules that mirrored modern wood anatomy research. Today, we recognize hardwood as naturally rot-resistant, confirming that medieval selection practices were grounded in real biological effects. Tool marks found on excavated timbers also reveal a critical technique: surface compression. Medieval axes and adzes didn't simply cut, they compacted the outer fibers of the wood. This compression closed off microscopic pathways where water might enter. Modern experiments show that compressed surfaces absorb less moisture and slow down fungal colonization. So while medieval carpenters weren't intentionally engineering wood at a microscopic scale, their traditional tools created a protective effect that modern power tools fail to replicate. Machine-cut surfaces are more open, more porous, and more vulnerable, a subtle but important difference. Another forgotten method was the use of wood under constant load. Medieval builders understood that beams which bore weight stayed straighter and lasted longer, while unused timber deteriorated faster. Compression stabilizes the wood's internal structure, reduces warping, and prevents cyclic swelling that accelerates decay. Modern structural engineering supports this. Wood under consistent compression undergoes less dimensional change and is far less likely to develop cracks where moisture can infiltrate. This knowledge shaped medieval architecture, leading to tightly fitted joints, dense framing, and heavy roof systems that naturally protected the timber beneath them. In some regions, craftsmen also used partial charring to harden and preserve the outer layer of wood, a technique similar to modern shusugi-ban, but older. Lightly burning the surface created a carbonized layer resistant to insects, UV damage, and moisture. Archaeological evidence suggests that fence posts, foundations, and even weapon shafts were treated using controlled flame exposure. Modern science confirms what medieval builders learned empirically. Charred wood is hydrophobic, chemically stable, and highly durable. Even today, charred timber from early medieval settlements often survives better than untreated wood from later periods. Finally, the combination of all these practices, careful harvesting, water soaking, seasoning, smoking, oiling, charring, and selective use of tree parts created wood that could withstand centuries of weathering. Medieval craftsmen didn't rely on one miracle method. They layered many small, practical steps that produced extraordinary results. What survives today in archaeological sites, shipwrecks, and ancient buildings is physical proof of their effectiveness. Modern conservationists now study these traditional methods not as curiosities, but as sophisticated, environmentally sustainable techniques that surpass many industrial treatments in longevity. 4. Medieval wood in archaeology. Real examples that survived. Zone of the clearest pieces of evidence for the durability of medieval wood comes from ancient waterlogged environments. Archaeologists often recover wooden beams, tools, and structures preserved for nearly 1,000 years in rivers, wells, and harbor foundations. In these oxygen-poor settings, the decay organisms that normally consume wood simply cannot survive. As a result, the timber remains structurally recognizable even after centuries. Findings from medieval bridge piles, submerged walkways, and waterfront warehouses consistently show that wood treated with medieval method, especially winter-cut and water-soaked logs, endures far longer than expected when buried in stable conditions. Underground environments provide another striking example. Timber used in medieval mine supports, city foundations, and early drainage systems has been found in remarkable condition. The combination of compacted soil, limited oxygen, and mineral-rich environments acted as natural preservatives. Some of these beams also display clear evidence of charring, oiling, or resin coating, exactly the treatments described in medieval construction manuals. The survival of these timbers confirms that old preservation techniques were not only traditional but engineered, intentionally or not, to protect the material in harsh environments. The fact that these wooden supports still maintain their shape shows how effective those layered techniques were. Medieval shipwrecks offer some of the most dramatic examples of long-lasting timber. European shipyards regularly soaked and smoked planks before construction, and many vessels were coated with tar and resin. When such ships sank, the combination of deep water, low temperatures, and prior treatment helped preserve their timbers for centuries. In several wrecks, researchers found that even the sapwood survived far longer than untreated wood typically would, suggesting that both mineral absorption and organic coatings played a role. These ships essentially became time capsules, demonstrating how medieval craftsmen prepared wood for relentless exposure to saltwater, pressure, and marine life. In forested parts of Europe, archaeologists found preserved medieval wooden roads and trackways built over wetlands. These structures were constructed using carefully chosen logs, many of which were debarked, water-soaked, and sometimes even partially charred before being placed into peat bogs. With their acidic, oxygen-poor environment, naturally preserved organic material, but the fact that medieval wood survived better than other natural debris shows that the techniques used increased durability even before burial. Many of these trackways still retain their original shape, tool marks, and construction patterns after roughly a millennium. Finally, the survival of medieval woodworking tools themselves tells another part of the story. Handles of axes, adzes, mallets, and saws found in dry storage areas or buried workshops often retain exceptional integrity. Tool handles were typically made from naturally resin-rich woods like ash, oak, or yew, and were sometimes smoke-hardened for extra durability. Because these tools were treasured and repaired over generations, craftsmen took extra care to prepare them properly. Modern wood scientists analyzing these artifacts often note that their surfaces remain unusually compact, dense, and stable, a result of repeated handling, oil absorption from human contact, and intentional finishing techniques.